Item 5, statements on the report of the Independent Review Group Jadotville. I'd like to welcome the Minister of the House. He was with us and he did promise he would come back to us, and it is very unusual at this late stage of a parliamentary session where all of the items before us is legislation that a report which was only published at lunchtime and released to the public would be debated so quickly. And I think that, I suppose, highlights the importance of this issue to this House, the members of this House, but also to the Minister as well. And I'd like to thank him for, as he said he would do, and he is doing it, he would come back to the House with the report. And I'd like to thank him for doing so. Minister, welcome. You have 8 minutes. Carmarthen.
Take a little bit longer if I could get some flexibility from the Chair. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. At the outset today, I'd like to thank the Seanad for accommodating this debate on the report from the Independent Review Group on Jadotville, which was published today. The group examined the issue of the awarding of military medals to personnel who served at Jadotville while deployed overseas on the UN Peace Support Mission in the Congo 60 years ago. Last November, when I announced the establishment of an independent review of this important matter in this House, it was broadly welcomed and supported by all parties here. On that occasion, I undertook to return to the Seanad once the review was completed, and I'm here today to honour that commitment that I gave to you, even though I know it's very late in the day. Before I get into the detail of the report, I would like to personally take the opportunity to acknowledge and sincerely thank all those who engaged with this review process. There were a significant number of people who did so. In particular, I'd like to pay tribute to the 156 Irishmen who fought so valiantly at the Battle of Jadotville in 1961, and to their families who supported them throughout and in the years since. The review group acknowledges that they are extremely indebted to the veterans of A Company 35th Infantry Battalion who have recounted their experiences, their memories, their pain and their concerns with remarkable sincerity, honesty and authenticity. The Independent Review Group, convened by the Chief of Staff, brought together members with experience and competence in matters of military service, regulations and administration, an academic of standing with an understanding of the historical context in relation to the events in the Congo at that time, and an experienced archivist who could access source material. Maintaining its independence throughout the review process, the review group have presented its conclusions and recommendations based on a rigorous and objective examination and a thorough analysis of all material and evidence, including oral and written submissions from A Company veterans, their families and key experts. I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to the members of the review group who have carried out this comprehensive review into this very important chapter in Irish military history, using an evidence-based approach which was conducted in an impartial and professional manner. The report broadens the voices telling the history of the siege at Jadotville, with direct testimonies of veterans, and gives a comprehensive, multidimensional, contextualised account of the Battle of Jadotville and indeed its aftermath. Importantly, the report highlights a level of misunderstanding in relation to the particular recommendations made for consideration of an award, either for meritorious promotions or for military medals. Through the comprehensive research conducted by the review group, these misunderstandings, I think, are addressed, and the report quite clearly clarifies the factual position in relation to those recommendations made nearly 60 years ago. I welcome the clarification and the historical accuracy that this research process and the report brings on the issue. The report, perhaps most importantly, acknowledges the deeply unsettling aftermath of Jadotville, the vilification, the whispering campaigns, the complete breakdown of trust and the abandonment which the men of A Company suffered, which resulted in what is described in the report as the destruction of their bond with the Defence Forces and the state, which had sent them overseas in the cause of peace. This meant that many of them had nowhere to turn in the years, and for some in the decades, after Jadotville. The report states, the Jadotville experience was willfully ignored and knowingly silenced, initially in the 1960s and then in subsequent years also. Many of the veterans did not cope well with the legacy of their experiences, and I would sincerely like to acknowledge the support that families provided to Jadotville veterans in the years that followed. On behalf of the Irish State and on behalf of the Government, I would like to sincerely apologise to the men of A Company 35th Battalion who were not provided with the necessary supports or deserved recognition of their service on their return from Jadotville. And I would also like to apologise to their families for the many issues that arose as a result, some of them with tragic consequences. The lack of supports is extremely regrettable and should not have happened. We've learned from this, and we've taken great steps in the intervening years to support Defence Force personnel, their families, and veterans through the work of the Defence Forces Personnel Support Services and indeed other supports as well. Between July 1960 and May 1964, the Irish Defence Force personnel were deployed overseas on the UN Peace Support Mission in the Congo, with over 6,000 individual tours of duty at that time. Tragically, 26 Defence Force personnel lost their lives during the UN deployment in Congo. These soldiers paid the ultimate price in support of peace and working for their country. As Minister for Defence, I can assure you that all are remembered with the respect and honour by my department and by the Defence Forces. I've recently returned from a visit to the Lebanon, where I had an opportunity to meet with Defence Force personnel while deployed as peacekeepers in UNIFIL, and also to pay tribute to fallen heroes linked to UNIFIL in the past also. Ireland will have the presidency of the United Nations Security Council in September, which also happens to be the month of the 60th anniversary of Jadotville. And during this month, there will be a focus on Ireland's sustained contribution to peacekeeping since it first deployed in 1958 with the UN. It will offer us an opportunity to show our pride in those who have served in our name at the request of the United Nations. It also offers the opportunity to recall the 87 members of our defence forces who made the ultimate sacrifice while serving the cause of peace overseas. This substantial report makes a number of recommendations, and I will be considering all of them, but I think there is some time needed to reflect fully on those recommendations and the detail of the report itself. Tonight, however, given the strong interest in relation to the awarding of medals, I would like to focus particularly on recommendations made in this regard. The terms of reference provided that the review group may consider the actions of individuals not already the subject of a recommendation for a medal in respect of Jadotville. During the course of the review process, the review group considered that Commandant Pat Quinlan, Company Commander, A Company, who was not previously the subject of a recommendation for a medal in respect of Jadotville, merited further investigation. The review group identified primary source evidence for the consideration of a recommendation for a posthumous award of the Distinguished Service Medal for Commandant Pat Quinlan. I'm happy to accept this recommendation, and it is intended to establish a Military Medals Board without delay to consider this recommendation. While we should not take are while we should take care not to preempt the outcome of the deliberations of a properly constituted medals board, I've requested that they report their findings to the Chief of Staff by the end of August. The report is clear that a medal for Commandant Pat Quinlan should be considered in the light of the collective effort of all who served with him, as well as his leadership during the Jadotville battle. When someone commits a career to the Defence Forces, medals really matter, along with the recognition that comes with them, the precedent set, and how they compare with others who have also been honoured with medals. This happens, as we all know, on the basis of a military assessment. It should be noted that for the 1965 Medals Board, 360 cases were presented for consideration, and from those, 65 personnel were recommended for the award of the Distinguished Service Medal for service with the UNOC. There are always dangers with recommending medals for some and not others, and this report notes that advocating for medals for some and not others in the case of Jadotville has left some Jadotville veterans feeling that their contribution during the Battle of Jadotville was perhaps of lesser value. Many veterans of A Company and their families, as evidenced in this report, reinforced the point that they value the integrity and the status of the Bon Jadotville, or the Jadotville Medal as it's called, and therefore the report recommends that the status of an Bon Jadotville should be retained and should be afforded due respect in recognition of the actions of A Company at Jadotville. I recognise that this is a report of 457 pages, and many of you have only just received the report today. I advise you to take the time to read and review it, and I hope that this wide-ranging and thorough independent examination finally addresses and brings some closure to the legacy issues relating to military medals for veterans of Jadotville. And while the outcome of the review may not be what some might have anticipated or hoped for, there is no doubt that this rigorous review was carried out with an evidence-based and systematic approach and was conducted in a fully independent manner, with certainly no influence or input from me. With the historic accuracy that this report brings, I now appeal for unity of purpose in bringing some closure for many of the families affected, and in particular for veterans still impacted. In conclusion today, I would like to recognise again the courage, the skill and extraordinary contribution and sacrifice made by those involved at the time, and to quote directly from the report, to all veterans of A Company, 35th Infantry Battalion and 1 Infantry Group, we salute your outstanding service as peacekeepers with the United Nations mission in the Congo in 1961. I would like to also say to the House that during our presidency of the Security Council in September in New York, I intend to hold an appropriate occasion and commemoration for the service of all peacekeepers, but in particular those who served in Jadotville. And of course, we will also commit to hold a state event to recognise the 60th anniversary, which I think is on the 16th of September, and that will probably be held on the following Sunday, as would be traditional in terms of defence events, which I think might be around the 19th. But certainly we'll inform members in relation to those formal ceremonies and events in recognition of the extraordinary service of the men involved. I look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your words. And I think it's appropriate that the families be recognised, because many of them did suffer as a result of what happened to their loved ones in Jadotville. Could I call on Senator John McGahan?
Thank you, Oireachtas. Minister, first of all, you absolutely have delivered on your commitment today, and I want to thank you for doing that. A number of months ago, when you said this report would be initiated, you gave a clear time frame and definitive time frames about when you come back, and you've done that today. And I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for that. I also want to take this opportunity to say thank you to you and your officials for the engagement that you've given me and every other senator in this House, which I know we can all say that very fairly. You are one of the few people over the last number of years who has really put a lot of effort into this, and that is to be commended. To go into the concept of the report today, on one level, it is, I suppose, quite disappointing that it is 480 pages, and it's difficult to delve into something and be able to come into a debate 5 or 6 hours later and be able to give a considered response. And, you know, naturally you can accept that. And when I did look through it today, a number of things really struck me that I want to try and touch on briefly. The first one is in relation to the Bon Jadotville medal and the concept that some veterans, or the report itself, would have felt that we were trying to diminish the seriousness of that. And I'd like to take this opportunity to put that on the record, that that's absolutely not the case. The Bon Jadotville medal was awarded in 2017, again perhaps as a result of political pressure that could have been led by Senator Crockwell a number of years ago and other members of this House that came about, that decided to get the issue back on the agenda. And that was a great job well done. And what we were trying to do now wasn't to try and diminish the record of that medal, not in any sense of the matter. What we were trying to do was to ensure that the other medals that were recommended by Commandant Quinlan back in the 1960s were awarded and were properly done, and that everyone got the proper recognition. So it doesn't sit easy with me that parts of the report perhaps say that there was potentially the opportunity to create a two-tiered system of veterans, because that is absolutely not the case. And I want to take the opportunity now to say that. I certainly don't believe that. The other bit that I did read in and delved into in detail was what the report felt in relation to the Senate debate that took place here on the 11th of November in 2020, which I feel was quite selective. I think it paints a number of senators, all of us included, and I've thought about these words before I used them, but glorified ambulance chasers, pushing these sort of political agendas. I've never had a political agenda on this whatsoever. We all have political agendas, of course, but this is the one issue that there was no political agenda from any member here. You know, there really wasn't. It was a great example of cross-party coming together on cross-party lines. There was no one-upmanship. There was no political agendas. It was trying to just get this back on the table of discussion, which we did, and which you then thankfully instituted through a review board, which is what we all asked for. But I do take offence at some of the language in relation to senators and in relation to this House. For example, and I'm just going to quote from it here, and I quote, "Rather unwittingly, the Senate debate seemed intent on sowing renewed division by creating two classes of Jadotville veterans. It seemed to ignore on Bon Jadotville and showed little awareness to the fact that further medals would be a decisive act among veterans still living." Another issue there that I saw towards the end of it that kind of struck me, and I quote, "No politician cared enough about the Jadotville veterans to even discuss with the Independent Review Group the possibility of talking to the group or making a submission on behalf of the veterans." And then the coincidence of it is, or the contradictory point is, 3 sentences later, it says, "Not any political parties or outside influences should have any view at this in the first instance." And we all said it ourselves last November. And this is the point that has to be, and I can understand how layman's terms or the general public can make them say, like, government and politicians have no role whatsoever in deciding what medals go anywhere. That's a total result for the Irish Army and the military, and that's absolutely the proper way to go about it. So never in a million years would I have thought it was acceptable for me, as a politician, as a member of this House, someone who tried to advocate for an independent review group to come along, and to be perfectly truthful, have little or no military. I'm not a military historian. I can't look at stuff and say this was the correct military procedure or not. I think it would have been wrong or inappropriate for me or another politician that was pushing this to go and make a review or make a submission or appear before the committee. I was more than happy to leave that to the professionals, i.e. the people who have dedicated their lives to the study of Jadotville, or the people who have dedicated their lives to campaigning on this issue. But I definitely would have liked to have been able to make a submission after what I've read about myself in this report, what I've read about Senator Wall, Senator Crockwell in this report. I definitely would have loved the opportunity to respond to some of it. Because my thing is, in 20 years' time or in 30 years' time, and this is coming from someone who studied history, I love history. If I wasn't a politician, I'd love to be a historian. in 20 years' time, if I'm a Martian or someone from outside space that's coming out and reading this report, I would read the references in relation to the Senate debate as politicians who came in, didn't know what they were doing, muddled the whole thing up, and then tried to, and were doing it for some sort of nefarious political reasons. Because that's, with all due respect, that's the view I got from this when I read it about the Senate debate last week. And I felt the quotes that were used in relation to the Senate debate from veterans, and absolutely totally entitled to those views, but to use a selective quote out of hundreds, if not thousands of hours to back up the narrative that what happened in this chamber last 6-7 months ago was wrong, I would have accepted it more if we had had a negative quote about it backed up by a positive quote about it. Because I know from my own experience, the amount of people that I spoke to that were directly involved with Jadotville, that had family members who were directly involved with Jadotville, were absolutely delighted and extremely appreciative of what happened here last November. And it is perfectly acceptable to have people who didn't like or didn't accept what happened here last November. But I think in the interests of transparency and fairness, both of those views should have been held side by side for prosperity, so that historians or those of the future can look at it and can see that it's a clear and balanced issue. And that is just my view. That is my view about how I feel the Senate was spoken about. I felt some of the language in relation to the Senate debate was actually politely condescending when I look at some of the language that was used. And I'm just trying to find some of it here, if you could just bear with me. But the other point was, as evident in the Senate debate, the political pressure coming from county councils, other bodies and individuals. Like, you know, there was certainly nobody pushing me to try and bring this issue forward. There was no pushing me, a county council or anything else, to try and say we should do this. I just felt that this was absolutely the right thing to do. And if we hadn't have pushed this 9 months ago, we wouldn't have this independent review board in the first instance. You know, and I think the good thing about the independent review board, and I said it, which is not acknowledged in this, but I said it in November, is that let's have the review board, and if it turns around having acknowledged all of the information and still says, well, we're not going to award anything, we're not going to recommend anything, I said then, and I say it now, well, that's fair enough, because the Minister, and you've done everything you can today. And the final thing, just to wrap up before I conclude about it, is, Leader, and I quote, and this is from on page 10, the veil of silence cast over the Battle of Jadotville for decades, and the stigmatisation at all levels of those who fought bravely and survived Jadotville, does the Defence Forces no credit whatsoever, and this must never happen again. And let's pray to God that is the case.
Gerard Crocker.
Minister, as I start, I want to acknowledge the role you played in bringing an independent review group about, and I want to acknowledge the work of your department in the support it gave in every way. However, the brave men of Jadotville, along with their families and loved ones, have been dishonoured and treated abominably for 60 years by the Defence Forces in Ireland. Nothing in this report of the Independent Review Group on Jadotville published today addresses, seeks to undo or redress the wrong. Shamefully, it piles further pain, humiliation and suffering on the surviving veterans of Jadotville and dishonours the memories of the deceased Jadotville veterans. The comments I'm making now come from a variety of sources that have been contacting me today, last night, and I can tell you the anger out there is unbelievable. The Irish 35th Battalion in the Congo, which Jadotville A Company belonged to, were part of a larger UN military component, a brigade which was a UN Indian-led brigade at the time. The whole UN force in the Congo was led by an Irish general, of which the Indian-led brigade was a subordinate component part. I am told immediately prior to the fateful dispatch of A Company to Jadotville, 2 other infantry companies, one Irish and one Swedish, had been stationed in Jadotville but were quickly withdrawn by the Indian Brigade commander. A colonel with credible intelligence was provided to him that even 2 companies of soldiers were hopelessly outnumbered by assembling combined forces of Katanga, Gadamir and international mercenaries hell-bent on attacking the UN forces in Jadotville and reclaiming the town. I understand that the sequence of events and unorthodox orders given directly to the Irish battalion by the Irish Force Commander, bypassing proper channels of command and the Indian Brigade Commander, are at the root of this ill-fated deployment of A Company to Jadotville. Why the Irish Force Commander in this instance violated the proper chain of command when the Jadotville deployment of A Company subsequently went wrong became a centrepiece of not wishing to delve too deeply into the Jadotville in the Defence Forces Medals Board in the 1960s, lest the ugly truth be revealed. Both the Irish Force Commander and the Irish Battalion Commander in the Congo at the time were close personal friends and not just military colleagues. Both were from the same rural part of Ireland. I further understand that those who had erred in their flawed decision-making and subsequent issuing of unorthodox orders in the Congo, and who used personal friendships with Irish personnel then stationed in the Congo to have these flawed orders carried out, were subsequently in a position of high authority in Ireland when the 1960s Medal Board set. The so-called Independent Review Group report we are now discussing and the Jadotville Medals Board in the 1960s, when the terms of reference are carefully crafted and the membership of the boards are friendly forces, to use a military term, then the required partisan findings of the group and boards by convening authorities can all but be guaranteed as a tactic as old as time itself. But in the case of the so-called Independent Review Group, another worrying factor... Sorry?
You on the issue of privilege in the House. I want to remind you of the issue of privilege in the House in the event that you are going to name anybody.
I will not name anybody.
That's okay. Thank you.
I hope you had on the time for me now.
I will. I'll give you time.
Thank you. The close military friendships commissioned officers have with their cadets, classmates, while undergoing officer training in the military college. But even within these special friendships, there are always deeper friendships within a small number of fellow classmates. The 44th cadet class of 1969 to 71 was no different in this. It must be stated by me here tonight that within the 44th cadet class, that one of these deepest personal friendships was and which remains is between the son of the aforementioned Irish Force Commander in the Congo and the chair of the Independent Review Group, whose report we are now discussing.
Can I just...
I haven't named anybody.
No, Senator, the rule is clear. It's not only do you have to name somebody, but you also make them identifiable.
Very good.
Right? And I'm warning you on that issue.
I'll try.
No, you've breached it already. I just want to warn
Okay.
you. I take on board what people have said about the criticism of the Shannon in that report, and I will be taking it up with the people. I will be writing to the people who wrote the report on behalf of the Shannon, because our job as a Senate is to air issues of concern. I don't care if that's about the Defence Forces or about the Church or anybody. That is your job. I expect you to do that job. And while a report may criticise us, it must criticise us fairly. But they must recognise that the job of public representative is to represent the public. And that is what you did on this occasion. But I also remind senators they have a duty.
Cahir, look, I'm obliged at this stage to point out that I have spoken to the son of one of the actors in Jadotville, who asked the chairman of the board to recuse himself based on the relationships that exist. I'm bound to point that out. And
I just want to remind you of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
The process of investigating recommendations for the awarding or declining and the award of military medals falls exclusively within the statutory responsibility of the Defence Forces leadership. It is notable that the Independent Review Group was not mandated or formed within the remit of the said Defence Forces regulations on the award of military medals. It was a process that was ultimately brought about by the intervention of politicians. It is risible then to note that unworthy comment in the report on politicians who were and are rightfully vocal on honouring the heroes of Jadotville. In not engaging with the investigation group, no invitation was issued to me or to any senator that I know to engage with the review group. The recommendation of the posthumous award of a Distinguished Service Medal, DSM, to Commandant Pat Quinlan, this charismatic and brave commander of A Company 35th Irish Battalion in the Congo, is noteworthy. Incredibly, the The group report does not agree with the award of medals recommended by Commandant Quinlan for the other 33 members of the company for their valour and bravery in Jadotville. This is quite astonishing. The group sees fit to honour Commandant Quinlan, but somehow to dishonour him and his judgment when it comes to the field commander citing men for bravery. One must surely follow the other. It makes no sense other than the unthinkable of the group seeking to applaud the Quinlan family who have led the fight for proper honouring of these men and their families for decades. Pat Quinlan was a man of honour. He would be dismayed and dishonoured, at honouring him to the detriment of his fellow soldiers. The one thing I can tell you, Minister, tonight, the Jadotville heroes that exist today, those whether they're listed for medals or not, they loved Pat Quinlan. I have never met anybody who served that did not love Pat Quinlan. The Independent Review Group has veterans and members of had veterans and as an advisor who are themselves veterans and currently members of 3 recognised Defence Force veterans groups, ARCO, ONE and IUNVA. The negative and inevitable explosive consequence of this flawed report will cause upset, dissension within and between all 3 organisations. It will also sadly cause unnecessary rupture and discord between serving and retired commissioned officers, their NCOs and private soldiers. This is regrettable in the extreme. For those serving and retired, at a time of great and increasing difficulties for the Defence Forces, it could and should have been avoided. The award of a DSM, at one time a badge of honour, in the Defence Forces for those who carried out acts of individual or collective valour, bravery, decision-making of the highest order when faced with hostile actions, an imminent threat to life and limb, on the saving of land and life on land, at sea or in the air, at home or overseas deployments. Sadly, the award of DSM medal has been itself dishonoured in recent times for being continuously awarded to most senior officers of the Defence Forces on their retirement, merely for having occupied the highest rank of the Defence Forces, for little else of note. The citation attached to these recent DSM medal awards are a matter of public record and cringeworthy in the extreme. By comparison, these flawed citations make the brave men of Jadotville seem like superheroes, which they were. The attack by Japan on Pearl Harbor on the 6th of December 1941, before the formal declaration of war by Japan and the USA, has been described as the day of infamy. In military history. Today's publication of this report in Ireland's Day of Infamy. It's a proud military history. Those associated with the report will soon be forgotten, and we will be left to remember their part in it. The heroes of Jadotville will live on in the memory forever, and rightly so. Minister, every time I go to Galway, I meet Charlie Cooley. Charlie Cooley was nominated for a DSM. And every time I meet Charlie, he says to me, "Crockwell, where's my feckin' medal?" When I saw the report this morning, Minister, I will tell you something. As one who served in that unit, I cried. I cannot believe you opened the door to allow the Defence Forces to undo the greatest wrong in the history of this state. And I admire you greatly for it. It took great courage. And what did they do? They screwed it up, and they couldn't have done it worse if they tried. They have set officers against men. The number of enlisted personnel and former enlisted personnel who have contacted me today and said to me, "I always told you, Crockwell, it's only a feckin' officer's army." What am I going to say to them? What can I say to them? I told them about the parade in September that you were organising. They said they wanted nothing to do with it. It is such a heartbreaking day for 33 families. Tell the Quinlevins, whose brother killed himself, that he wasn't worth his DSM. I don't know what to say. I admire you for what you did. I am so desperately sorry, because the allegations of conflict of interest on that board that were there from the beginning are coming at me left, right and centre from Australia, Indonesia, America, England, you name it. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Inish Senator Fiona O'Loughlin.
And I can't but be moved and touched by the emotion that Senator Crockwell has shown, and I empathise and I feel every bit of it, as I think many of us do in the Chamber. Firstly, Minister, can I thank you and commend you for your formal apology here tonight to those that served in the A Battalion and, of course, to their families who have supported them throughout the years. I would also like to acknowledge the fact that you have stated that it is your intention to have 2 different ceremonies this year. One in New York at the UN to recognise all of those wonderful men and women who served as Irish peacekeepers and as Irish ambassadors throughout the world, and then one on the 16th of September to remember those from the Battle of Jadotville 60 years later. The last time that we spoke in the Seanad in relation to this, the Cathaoirleach, and I want to thank you once again, read the name of each and every one of those that served in that Battle of Jadotville into the Seanad record in recognition of the respect and esteem in which these men were held right across the political divide. I think we should remember that this was the very first peacekeeping mission in which a significant number of Irish soldiers took part, and it's only right that we should recall and honour the contribution of all who served in the various Irish contingents over the course of the long and difficult and complex mission. And, of course, we recognise those that have participated in all missions since 1958. There's huge emotion attached to the Jadotville case, and rightly so. The men who served in Jadotville are responsible for extraordinary service to peacekeeping and to Ireland in, again, what was an incredibly complex, challenging and a very difficult space. They fought valiantly for 5 days, and the fact that we had only 5 injuries was testament to the man that led them, Pat Quinlivan. Of course, we remember all of those who've died overseas in the cause of international peace and security, and I particularly want to remember Sergeant John Lynch, who died in the Lebanon in 1997. I was teaching his young daughter at the time, and I have very strong and fond memories of him. Minister, the last time that we discussed this, you mentioned that any awards that would be recommended must be seen as having been awarded in exceptional circumstances. The siege of Jadotville was certainly exceptional, and the bravery and the courage shown by these men was absolutely exceptional. In terms of the report that we have in front of us today, and as you say, it's a long report, and I think it's regrettable that we haven't had the opportunity to go through it in detail. But we do certainly join in the tributes to the 156 Irishmen who fought and their families who supported them. And it's good to see the report highlighting both the deeply unsettling aftermath and the huge lack of personal welfare supports afforded to the men following events at Jadotville, their period in captivity, and upon their return home. I do want to acknowledge that the Chief of Staff has said that the veterans of ACOI, 35th Infantry Battalion and their actions are the embodiment of our Defence Forces' values of respect, loyalty, selflessness, physical courage, moral courage and integrity. And while I certainly do not agree with many of the report's 19 recommendations, I think the conclusion in itself is important, that the veil of silence cast over the Battle of Jadotville for decades and the stigmatising at all levels of those who fought bravely and survived Jadotville does the Defence Forces no credit whatsoever. This must never happen again. Unfortunately, I think the recommendation that only one medal be awarded in this does the Defence Services no service again. I think it's important just to mention very briefly the recommendations under Veterans Affairs, because these are important and we have to acknowledge these in a day and evening that is disappointing for all of us that have a particular interest in it, as I do, coming from the county of Kildare, the heart indeed of the Defence Forces. And I think the recommendations that the Defence Forces should now and only now engage with veterans, focusing initially on those who served with the 35th Infantry Battalion, to identify, to offer and to arrange support to those requiring it. The recommendation that the Defence Forces should review to expanding its mental health and wellbeing strategy to support the wider defence community of serving personnel, veterans and their families is very, very welcome and long overdue. The fact that there is a recommendation that both the Department of Defence and the Defence Forces should enhance their financial and material support for veteran centres and drop-in centres operating under the auspices of the ONE and the Irish United Nations Veterans Association is also very welcome. I think we've all engaged with the ONE right around the country. They are a group of incredible people and I'm really glad to see this included. The Independent Review Group recommends the Government appoints a Commissioner for Veterans Affairs who would act as an ambassador for veterans. Hugely important. Coming from Kildare, I see the many challenges, the many issues that veterans have, from housing to welfare supports. And I think the recommendation that there would be a collaboration across government departments and local authorities to provide transition support again is hugely, hugely important to veterans and their families. I want to go to what my colleague referred to in relation to the comments in the report about public representatives and their comments both in the Seanad and indeed wider than that. And to me, I take grave exception to the language that was used. I think it's an insult to every single one of us here, and it's an insult to the 18 county councils that passed motions to support the veterans and their families. And I'm going to mention the language that's been used. Language such as downplaying, purposeful or in ignorance. And that's basically saying that we were speaking in ignorance. Talking about public representatives having a lack of understanding, confusion over what was mentioned, a tendency to inflate numbers, exaggerated claims, unsupported claims, a lack of interrogation of the facts in favour of easy comments uttered, public representatives demonstrating a lack of an informed understanding, and the Seanad debate characterised by groupthink, incorrect information, misleading statements and the denigration by those present of An Jadotville. This is an absolute disgrace and I take grave, grave exception to it. But Minister, I do thank you for your work, for your apology and for your commitment to doing your best, both in terms of the 2 events we will have this year and into progressing the recommendations for the veterans. Thank you.
Senator Paul Gavin.
Oireachtas, Minister, thank you for coming in this evening, first of all. I suppose, like others, I'm genuinely taken aback by this report, and at the same time I'm very conscious of what the Minister says, that it's a very detailed report, and I haven't read it as thoroughly as I'd like to just yet. I've gone through as much as I could in the time allotted this afternoon. And like others, genuinely, I was just really taken aback by the language. And I know you're in a difficult position, Minister, and I don't want to make that position any more difficult. I think you've come here in a very honourable capacity this evening. I want to acknowledge that, first of all. But when the report talks about the Jadotville bandwagon, what does that say about the very honourable efforts of my colleague beside me, my colleagues opposite, across all parties. I just want to particularly pay tribute, though, to Senator Crockwell, because I know he's been so passionate on this for so long. I also want to mention my colleague now in the Dáil, Padraig McLaughlin, who spoke very passionately on this issue on many occasions. And equally, Senator McLaughlin, Senator McGahan. And it's rare that we all agree on something, Minister. I think you'll acknowledge that. And the tone of the report, the more I read, the more taken aback I was. I mean, it's mocking, it's patronising, it's insulting. And I would have to ask you, Minister, to comment. How do you feel about that phrase, Jadotville bandwagon, that's used there? Because in all of the engagements that I've seen on this, all I've seen is politicians genuinely trying to make a case for the heroes of Jadotville. Nothing else. No one's played party politics on this issue. We've come together to try and see these men honoured in the way that they should be. And the truth of the matter is, unless I'm reading the report wrong, and I will take the time to complete it and read it more thoroughly, I think it's an attack on this institution. I have to say that. That's how it looks to me. And I don't think that's in any way justified. And that's not what I had expected to be saying here this evening. I saw the headlines, and like others, I want to just express my huge disappointment at the fact that this report does not recommend that the heroes of Jadotville receive medals. And there is an irony, of course, in the fact that they quite rightly recognise the heroics of Commandant Pat Quinlan and then disregard entirely his own recommendations. That in itself. And reading the report, it just does seem, and I'm just being honest with you, Minister, that there seems to be a deliberate aim to effectively just hold entirely to the position of the previous military tribunals in terms of the medals. It just seems to just not move 1 inch, apart from recognising, and of course it's important to recognise, the amazing heroics of Commandant Pat Quinlan. The tragedy is that there was an opportunity here to undo the wrongs that were committed by the state against these troops for so long. They have been traumatised, they've been stigmatised, they've been victimised. At least 6 veterans have taken their life in the aftermath of the battle after returning home. And I can't imagine the sense of disappointment that the veterans and their families must be feeling this evening. And I'm sure, like everyone else here, I was really struck by what Senator Crockwell said in terms of the reactions. And I've been monitoring the reactions on social media as much as I can. And I mean, the word disappointment doesn't even begin to address just the huge, I will almost suspect there's a sense of betrayal here in terms of the language and the dismissive tone of the report, in terms of the very genuine, sincere, and in my view, absolutely correct call for these men to be recognised and to be given those medals that Pat Quinlan wanted them to get. So I'm conscious, really not to say a lot more at this point, Minister, because I will take the time to come back and read the report fully from start to finish. I do want to acknowledge and recognise the importance of the apology you've given this evening. I think it's very important that that's on the record and it's been given. But I have to say, I mean, the language of this report is so political. It's so targeted. And I think it's targeted at undermining the sincere work of everybody across this chamber. And I have to say, what's motivating that? This doesn't look like a balanced report to me. It just honestly doesn't. And I don't think anyone, and I'd be interested to see, Minister, do you want to stand over the language they use? Do you want to stand over the very dismissive comments across people from all parties in this chamber? It looks to me as if, and I just have to be honest here, I'm only offering an opinion, Cathaoirleach, that there was a predetermined agenda in terms of large aspects of this report. And I say that with not with accusation, but with just regrets and disappointments. But that's how it reads to me at this point in time. Graham.
Thank you, Senator. Could I now call on Senator Mark Wall?
I want to welcome the Minister for Defence into the House this evening. I share the bitter disappointment that has been expressed here by colleagues tonight in relation to this report. And I am going to go into the language used as I proceed, but I do think it's very important that we all get a chance to read the full 500-odd pages. When I raised this at the order of business this morning, the leader in her reply stated that we would have the report in our inboxes at 12 o'clock today. In fairness to her, we did, but I have only had a chance to look at those headlines and a chance to take those in. In saying that, I want to refer to a number of comments of the official press release by the Minister's Department and indeed part of the Minister's speech here tonight. The press release stated that the report concluded, in relation to the possible awards of medals, the Independent Report Group, having identified primary source evidence, recommends that Commandant Pat Quinlan, Company Commander A Company, should be considered for a posthumous award of the Distinguished Service Medal. The press release confirmed by the Minister tonight stated that the Minister, as he has said, intends to establish a military medals board to consider this recommendation without delay. The release goes on to say that the Independent Group also considered all previous recommendations for military medals with respect to the events at Jadotville. Unfortunately, for so many here tonight and listening in, based on the research conducted by the Independent Group during this review, it's strongly of the view that there is no merit to the reopening of the recommendations of the 61, 62 and 65 medal boards. It has been mentioned, Cathaoirleach, and I want to say it again, that I do welcome an aspect of what the Minister has said tonight, and that's the apology. And, you know, the deeply upsetting aftermath of Jadotville, mentioning the lack of personal welfare supports afforded to the men following those events, their period in captivity and upon their return home. I mentioned in my contribution in November that many of these men were scorned and ridiculed, called jacks, on their return home following their engagement in the Congo. Many had to live with that scorn, as the Minister himself has said tonight, for most of their lives. And it is important here tonight to acknowledge the apology the Minister has given to the men of A Company 35th Battalion and indeed their families. In this regard, I also acknowledge the comments of the Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces, Vice Admiral Mark Mellett, where he concluded the veterans of A Company 35 Infantry Battalion and their actions are the embodiment of the Defence Forces. Yes, they are. The values of respect, loyalty, selflessness, physical courage, moral courage and indeed integrity. It is a matter of much regret, he goes on to say, that the values we all hold so dear were not evident in the manner of which Óglaigh na hÉireann failed to embrace the veterans of the Battle of Jadotville on their return from service in the Congo. The Chief of Staff also went on to say that valuable lessons have been learned from this experience, and he is quoted as saying he trusts it will never ever be repeated. There's been much written about what happened in 1961, and indeed your own notes, Minister, goes through exactly the time frame of the battle, and I don't think anybody has asked or argued with that from what I've seen today, but there are 500 pages. Personally, I want to thank you, Cathaoirleach, because you took our motion here in November, and there was a very comprehensive debate that you attended yourself as well, Minister, and at that particular debate you informed us that there would be a review group that would examine the case. And over a long period of time, as has been said by other speakers, many public representatives, from Dáil deputies to fellow senators to county council colleagues, raised their concerns on this matter and sought a review of the engagement. And I believe, Minister, I genuinely believe that they did so out of a sense of public duty and public duty only. And they wanted to recognise the contribution of those brave men to the Defence Forces and indeed the UN flag that they fought under. I believe they also did this out of loyalty to the families of those involved, many of whom have contacted those same public representatives that we have spoken about tonight. Since that time in November, a number of colleagues in this Seanad, many here tonight and who have taken part in events and have spoken here tonight, they have taken part in events to commemorate those from A Company who fought in Jadotville. Most recently, when we all met at the memorial in Merrion Square last month to take part in the Jadotville Challenge, which was in aid of the homeless veterans of the Defence Forces and organised by ONE, the National Organisation of Ex-Service Personnel. Such is the legacy of A Company, that their memory and their deeds continue to be remembered and celebrated by public representatives and the public to this day, and so they should.
It has been asked of you, Minister, and I'm going to ask you as well, that you will join with me in thanking all those public representatives who felt it was their public duty to bring to you the need for a review of this engagement. As I said last November, while I support the Minister's comments that politicians should not award medals, I'm sure you will agree that when we are brought information about incidents such as Jadotville and our heroes, we should bring it to his attention as the Minister for Defence in order that we can go through the due process of awarding those medals. For me, this was and can only be about those from A Company who boarded that plane to the Congo to serve their country and the UN. I make no apology for trying to represent those Jadotville families who contacted me to ask me to bring this matter into the public arena, as so many of my colleagues have done. These men are heroes and will always be heroes to so many. They, under their commanding officer, Commandant Pat Quinlan, have created a proud legacy for the Irish Defence Forces. Minister, I too want to bring up the language used in the report. I welcome your intervention, Cathaoirleach, that you will write to those involved in the independent review and ask them to consider the language that they have used. It is an absolute disgrace what language they have used. And other senators have mentioned various aspects of it, including the Jadotville bandwagon. Who came up with such a term, Minister? Maybe you might be able to tell us tonight, because again, I stress to you, my only intervention in this was trying to represent Irish heroes. That's all any of us were here. When we spoke in this Shannon Chamber in November, it was to represent those heroes who fought in Jadotville in 1961. We, and this is the important point, had no other agenda. And the question has been asked and asked again, were there other agendas at play? And maybe that's the detail we need to get to. Because we have a situation tonight, and I too, like Senator Crogwell, and I pay tribute to Senator Crogwell for the work that he's done over the last number of years, that we all joined him, as I said to him a year ago, to support that work and to get recognition for those who fought at Jadotville. I have had those calls as well, as other senators have said, from people throughout the country asking them what has gone wrong here. Why are they seeing a report? Why are they seeing a report that there is no recommendation for Pat Quinlan's recommendations that he fought for and did so well against so many of those comrades that he had who fought with him in the siege of Jadotville? And that is the bottom line. We're recognising Pat Quinlan as a commander, but we're not recognising his own recommendations. And to me, that is the question, Minister. Why are we not doing that? I cannot accept this report as it stands, Cathaoirleach. I'm asking you for another debate when we get a chance and time allows us to go back here again. The Minister himself has said that we all need to read it. I agree with that. But we must come back to this House. We must come back to this House for one reason and one reason only, because the heroes of Jadotville want us to come back and want us to get to the bottom of exactly what happened here. And time is against us, and the sooner we get back here and we debate what was in this report, the better. Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. Thank you, Minister, for coming in tonight.
Senator Alice Mary Higgins.
Thank you very much. And first, I welcome you, Minister, to the House to discuss this and recognise your previous engagement with this House in it. And I want to acknowledge the very sincere engagement by colleagues from right across the House and from every party who have spoken about this issue. And again, I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Senator Frances Black, who has engaged very closely with many of the families of the survivors of Jadotville. And I know that she regrets that she can't be here, but I want to just acknowledge, as somebody who has watched these debates and not been the key speaker in them in the past, that there is no doubt in my mind of the absolute sincerity, of the lack of political division or motivation or point scoring, but the real genuine sincerity of those in this House. And I would note this sits with, in fact, a record in this House of where issues are issues of international human rights, of decency, issues, for example, such as the murder of the lawyer in the past, of Pat Finucane in the past. You know, on all of those issues, this House, and you will be aware of that, Minister, because you've often been here for these debates, there is sincere and cross-party engagement from people. And I think that's important to note. And I regret that the report does not identify and does not recognise the tone and the motivation in the Shannon's engagement. But I think we should be glad of that engagement, because the Shannon debate did contribute to the fact of an independent review group being formed, and some of the very important recommendations in respect of welfare, in respect of counselling, in respect of supports for those who exit or will leave the sports. Many of those recommendations, and I hope they will be acted upon, those recommendations on welfare, would not have got the centre stage. They would have not, without the review group and without the press on that issue from this House. However, while there are issues that are really important in terms of welfare, in terms of health support, in terms of counselling for those traumatised not simply by the events of Jadotville but by how they were treated in the years past subsequently, and indeed the trauma visited on their families by how society treated them. While those are part of what it is, the real core here is still that question of recognition. And it is a matter, I think the report itself acknowledges, the Jadotville experience was willfully ignored and knowingly silenced initially in the 60s and subsequent years. This is from Minister. You pulled this out, I think, interesting yourself as a quote. And having been silenced for so long as an experience, I think what people want now is it be, first of all, heard, and that it also doesn't become invisible. And that is why it is a concern for those 33, the 8 remaining living members of the 33 who had been nominated, who had been recommended by Colonel Pat Quinlan for awards, and indeed the 5 for Distinguished Service Medals, and the 5 indeed who had been recommended for military medals for gallantry. They felt seen by their commander, and I'm sure it was an important thing for them that he saw what they did, and he saw the bravery that they had in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And that, as well as that collective recognition, which is, and I welcome, and it's very important to remember, there is no question of that being deserved by all who received the Jadotville medal in general, but that those specific people and their families, and Senator Black is often better at reading the personal stories than I do. I tend to go to the policy. But I think she shared with me the correspondences, some of them that she's had. People who talked, Noel Carey, who talked about going in as a young man to be a peacekeeper and finding himself fighting for the survival of his friends, of his colleagues and those in his group. Of the woman, Helena Quinn, who writes about her father, Corporal Tyke Quinn, and the impact it had on him all his life, and what it meant for him, the specific role he played in relation to mortars, in relation to digging in defensive positions. All of that particular work was seen by their commander, and that's why he recommended them, and that's why it does still, I think, feel very difficult. It is appropriate that Colonel Pat Quinlan is nominated and should be, that there's a recommendation that he should be awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. But one of the ways that he could also be honoured is by recognising that as a commander, he recognised the gallantry of those who served with him. And I just think, Minister, I want to put that in. I want to just note, it was very clear, people have said, we in the Seanad did not interfere, did not seek, nobody sought to make submissions or to in any ways engage with the work of the Independent Review Group, because they're an Independent Review Group. But similarly, the Independent Review Group have now made their recommendations, but there will now be a new potential medals board. And while the medal boards of the 60s made their decisions, that medal board will also be independent of the Independent Review Group. It will make its own decisions. And I think it's maybe perhaps important that we don't close the door in terms of what that medals board, should a new one be constituted, as you've suggested. It will, of course, be looking to awarding the appropriate award to Colonel Pat Quinlan, but it could, I think, and should be free to make its decisions about what it might do in terms of a medals board in the future. Again, the medal boards of the 60s are fine, and I know the suggestion is they shouldn't be revisited, but I think that door should not be closed. Lastly, Minister, I just want to note in terms of UN peacekeeping, I think it's something that we are all incredibly proud of. Ireland has the longest unbroken service with the United Nations of any country. We have lost many people in peacekeeping, 26 people in Congo alone. And this peacekeeping, this UN peacekeeping, is very different. It's different from other kinds of military service, because it is not for interests, it is not for benefit, it is in the service of peace, in the service of the protection of life, in the service of the support for civilian society and protection for society. It is a very particular role that we've played. And I think it's very much, it was very regrettable that the narrative that was placed in terms of this kind of the framings of cowardice, the undermining, that work over 5 difficult days, over weeks of captivity, in preserving and protecting the lives of their colleagues, was part of that peacekeeping mission and that sense of humanity, and that sense of that these are soldiers who serve humanity and each other. They do not serve any interests. And I think it was very much in spirit with that, the way that they were directed to act and the way that they did bravely fight under the leadership of Colonel Pat Quinlan. And I think it is appropriate, Minister, that you mention Ireland's on the Security Council, and it's important for us to always remember the reason we're on the Security Council. One of the things is our role in disarmament. It is our role not just in peacekeeping, but in peace building. And it is Ireland's role in being a champion for peace, not subject to military interests, but subject to those United Nations values of humanity and peace. And again, I think it is appropriate that you mention you will look to find other ways to honour the men of Jadotville as part of our leadership of the Security Council in the autumn. Thank you.
Senator Robbie Gallagher, 4 minutes.
And Minister, I too would like to, at the outset, thank you for taking time out to be here this evening to listen to this debate and for the sincerity in which you are affording to this very sad affair. And it's disappointing, I think, that this is the 3rd attempt at trying to address this issue. And unfortunately for many, I'm saddened to say, it's falling sadly short of what their expectations were. All of these 156 people at the outset fought side by side. There was no distinction between any of them. They all had a job to do and done it to the best of their ability. But I think that the manner and the events subsequent, their experience out there, their experience upon their return home, has saddened so many. And many members have talked about it very eloquently here this evening. And it's, as I say, it's sad that this is the 3rd attempt at this since 1961, and that we end up with a 500-page report that still falls short and still disappoints and saddens so many people. I think that's hugely, hugely disappointing. I welcome your sincerity, Minister, as I said at the outset, and your formal apology here this evening to the survivors and the families of those that are still around. And I honestly don't know where we go from here. Normally when reports are written, there's an appeal mechanism built in where people that are disappointed or angered or whatever, but the outcome of something have an opportunity to make comments or make submissions in relation to that. I don't know whether the door is closed in relation to that particular process or not. I know President Higgins is the Supreme Commander, and I don't know whether some form of recognition, either through the President, who's highly respected by so many in this country, and rightly so, whether something issued by himself would be of some comfort to the family, or some form of memorial would be adequate. I don't know what, I don't have the answers to that, but I would ask sincerely, Minister, that you would have a look at to see what possibly the state could do to finally bring closure and to recognise the bravery of these 39 people who sadly lost their lives, but to all those other people and the families and the survivors that are still with us. It's very sad, and other members have spoken, and Senator Crockwell very passionately spoke of, and other members alluded to it as well, about the content of the report in relation to the members, not just of this House or these houses of the Oireachtas, but indeed to local authority members the length and breadth of this country, and put a question mark over their sincerity. And quite honestly, I didn't think it was part of the report. I didn't think it was necessary, and the comments, to put it mildly, are hugely disappointing. But I know we haven't had much time to digest a 500-page report, as Senator Wall outlined his contribution, as did others. But, Minister, with the passage of time, hopefully over the summer, perhaps we come back and revisit this. And I have every confidence that you will come forward with proposals that hopefully will go some way to satisfying the needs of those that campaigned so hard and have been involved in this sad, sad affair from the get-go. Senator
Joe O'Reilly.
Minister, I want to welcome your apology in paragraph 4 of page 2 of your submission or contribution, and thank you for that fulsome apology, and I hope it gets into the public domain, because it is important that we send out that message. I want to also acknowledge your initiating the review and the ceremonies you propose to hold in the autumn. I want to acknowledge the former Minister, Minister Paul Keogh, who recommended to Cabinet the presentation of the Bon Jadotville Medal, and who was the first Minister to so do, and to present the medals to those who served in Jadotville. I want to acknowledge former Minister Keogh's good work in that regard. I want to say that any criticism of today's report, and I spoke with some men today, I'll come to that, nobody is criticising Commandant Pat Quinlan, and there's no implied or explicit criticism of him. I want to salute the fact that our Cathaoirleach here named and brought the names of the veterans into the roll of honour of our Senate, and that was great. And just before I get into say a few things, I want to acknowledge Senator Crockwell's pioneering work in this area, and real commitment and emotional commitment, and very genuine, cerebral commitment as well as emotional. I want to say that the review group was looking at giving Distinguished Service Medal to 33 personnel and gallantry to 5. And these people had held out for 5 days between the 13th and 17th of September 1961, and they only surrendered when overwhelming odds made anything else a suicide mission, basically, and that should never be off the record. And I shared the disappointment of colleagues, I should have said that at the outset, with the outcome. Colonel Pat Quinlan did recommend the awarding of medals at that stage. So viewed, these people have been viewed in some circles for many years, the veterans of Jadotville, as they've been looked at ignominiously. Their pain they've suffered, there've been suicides, as we said, there's been issues with alcohol, a lot of problems arising, and it's certainly not a political issue, and it's very, very bad. Now, I want to say that a very distinguished member of my local community, Quartermaster Sergeant Sean Gregory, who was in the field of operations at that time and was policing the airport at the time of the Jadotville siege, would testify to me and to others of his recollection of the bad treatment of the men, particularly when they come home and since. He had been on 3 trips, 3 peacekeeping trips. He was in the area of operations and was a distinguished officer and would have known, and he said it was just disgraceful the way they were treated. There was so much collateral damage there. I do hope that the welfare recommendations are at least at a minimum adhered to. I would hope we do the welfare bit. I would hope that your letter is very strong in relation to the disgraceful insinuations about the motivation of political people from county councils, from the houses of the Oireachtas. That's beyond contempt for publicly paid people. And it's a very sinister type of thing, and I think Senator McGahan brought that very early and very well to notice. So I fundamentally hope that we'll have good ceremonies in September. I hope that we'll do the welfare bit. in a good and big and wholesome way, and I hope, Minister, that you will intervene to make sure that happens very largely. And I'd like to hear you say that at the end, maybe, that you will be making sure that happens. And I think, lastly, it's very regrettable that haven't recommended the Distinguished Service Medals. I personally regret it. I think we all do. It's a sad outcome, but we will hold these people as heroes, their families, and it is great you apologise to them. And I think all of us, and I and every one of us, should apologise to them and do. It's disgraceful what happened to these heroes and their families. It's one of the great shames of our history, and it's a shocking indictment that people be treated like this, who couldn't do otherwise unless they committed harry-carry or suicide collectively. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Anish. Senator Malcolm Bourne.
And thank you, Minister, for coming into the House. And with colleagues, I join with thanking you for the very sincere apology that you've delivered on the part of the state. But I too am disappointed. But I am angry as well, like others, where the motivation of those of us who have raised this issue is somehow questioned, where language is used. Recent events have shown that evidence-based historical accuracy has become a casualty in the evolving narrative for the memory and ownership of the Battle of Jadotville, where it says some views are the product of incorrect information and grandstanding for effect. That language is insulting, because there was unity within this House. But it's not just at local authority level, because I know at local authority level, in Wexford County Council, the motion in support of Jadotville was brought forward by Councillor Gary Laffin. In Kilkenny, it was brought forward by Councillor Joe Malone. They were former members of the Defence Forces. That's why they brought it forward. It wasn't out of any political reason. My interest in this was sparked when in Gorey, where I'm from, the Reverend Mark Hayden every year organises a remembrance service for all of those who served in uniform. He brought down Declan Power in 2005, soon after his Declan Power's book had been published, and that engaged people. And obviously the film that was directed by Richie Smith, which was based on that book, that obviously engaged the Irish public far more. And yes, I do accept with the film that there is poetic licence that has been taken. But their story had to be told. And this wasn't done out of any, bad motivation. It was about getting a story that everyone in here is proud of, our peacekeeping tradition in this country. And I know from talking to some of the veterans of Jadotville, but also from talking to members of the Defence Forces more generally and veterans, they feel passionately about that this story should be told. And this state tried to suppress that story for a long time. I think also credit should be given to Ronan McGreevy in the Irish Times, who was one of a number of journalists, but who continued to raise and to tell that story. And all that anybody ever wanted in here was for that story to be told, for that bravery and gallantry to be recognised, and for the state, yes, to apologise, but to give some form of recognition. So I'm certainly very disappointed on the basis of the findings of the report. But Minister, I think in terms of the learnings that we can go for this from forward, yes, the apology is really important. Yes, the welfare issues, and I take it that you will sincerely work to address those. I think how we generally treat our defence forces, and this is an issue which I think people are passionate about, and I look forward, Minister, to you ensuring that our defence forces and our peacekeepers do get the recognition that they deserve. But I think more than anything else coming out of this House here this evening, as has come out of this House in debates and where so many of us have raised this issue before, that we can say to those brave men of Jadotville that regardless of whether or not this report recommends medals or not, that we recognise your gallantry, we recognise your bravery, and that we are forever in debt to the contribution that you made to Irish peacekeeping and to ensure that the strong role that the Defence Forces of Ireland have played internationally, that will always be recognised.
And finally, Senator Micheál Carrigan.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, and you're very, very welcome, Mr. Coven. I want to thank you for coming to the House today. I think it's important to welcome the apology that you've given on behalf of the government in your opening statement. And I just want to also acknowledge your efforts previously in actually having this report commissioned to be here today. We live in a democracy, and the Defence Forces are there to defend our democracy. And we as senators, TDs or councillors are elected to represent the views of the people in our democracy. So I take issue with comments in the report. And I just went back to the comments I made myself on the day last November. I think it was probably the last person to speak. And I said that I agree with the numerous comments made here that it's up to the military to decide the matter of who is to receive medals and not politicians. We need to right or wrong, it's simple as that. So that was the common theme the last day, that we weren't there to interfere with it. So it's very, very disappointing. There's been a lot of disappointment in my own local constituency, particularly at Loan area, where a lot of the men came from. But I welcome the recommendations to erect a plaque in costume barracks. I welcome the state ceremony, which is to take place on the 60th anniversary. I welcome the supports now that are going to be put in place, particularly for the ONE, and I just want to recognise the work that they do across the country, and particularly in my own county. But I think it's important also to remember the 156 men from A Company, and to thank them for their service for our country. And I particularly want to thank Private Sean Dowler, who's from my own parish, who was one of those 156 men. And I think it's also important to remember all the Defence Forces and the members of the Defence Forces who have given their lives to serve in their country. And I was asked by Senator Riley just to put a comment that he didn't get time, that former soldiers have said to him and felt that medals should only be given to officers. Is that correct today, that have come to him today? So I just want to make that point. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Minister.
It's a bit unusual that I would comment on a debate in the Shannon, but seeing as the Shannon has been subject to this report, I think it would be remiss of me not to comment on it. I do believe the Shannon should have a special debate, as has been proposed, on the 60th anniversary of Jadotville in September. I do also want to read out the terms of reference of the report, which was issued by the Minister's Department. The terms of reference for the review is as follows. The review group will consider the ONUC operational environment in Katanga, and in particular in Elizabethville and Jadotville. Recommended the other element is that the review group will consider the historical evidence and the process in relation to all of the recommendations for military medals received with respect to the events at Jadotville or encompassing Jadotville. The review group will engage with national and international stakeholders, including Jadotville veterans, as appropriate, with the view to uncovering any additional or new evidence in the case. The review group may consider the actions of the individuals not already the subject of a recommendation for a medal in respect of Jadotville. The review group will report its findings to the Chief of Staff. The review group may make recommendations in relation to the possible awards in respect of Jadotville. That was the terms of reference, Minister. And I go to page 360 of the report, and I look at it and I see a new public and political campaign for medals. A campaign to lobby local and national politicians to award medals began in earnest in February 2019. Our job, we get lobbied all the time. That is appropriate. People should lobby us. But often members take up causes. There's a list of members who are mentioned in that section of the report, that chapter 11. There's Eamon Scanlon, there's Jack Chambers, there's Paul Keogh. There is a number of councillors mentioned, too many to name. It does make this point. Just remember what I said in relation to the terms of reference. The Rekindling Medals campaign became a convenient way to attack the government and attack senior levels in the Defence Forces. Now, when you hear that comment, along with all the other elements of that chapter, I think you could safely say, Minister, that that is not in the terms of reference of the review. And I'm from County Kerry, Pat Quinlan's from County Kerry. There is a monument to Pat Quinlan between Derrynane and Waterville. If you ever on the Ring of Kerry, I'll ask you to stop by. I'm sure he would rather all his men get medals than he get a medal. Minister.
Well, first of all, can I thank all of the senators for their contributions this evening. This is, I know, is an issue that is emotive, and many people have invested a lot of time and effort in relation to raising concerns in relation to Jadotville, and more importantly, how people were treated when they returned. No Irish Defence Force member should be vilified when they return from serving in an overseas mission. And that is certainly what happened to far too many in the aftermath of Jadotville. And I'd like to just make a number of points. First of all, the state is making an apology this evening for how people were treated. We are rewriting history this evening in terms of the wrongs that were done, and at least in our words are recognising what should not have happened but what did happen, and the lessons that we've learned from that. And I hope that in the debate we've just had we don't lose the substance of what is happening this evening. Despite the frustrations that many have expressed in relation to the report. I think it is useful that you're committing to another debate in September or at some point in the future. I would ask people to really take the time over the summer to read this report in full. I'm very conscious of the fact that I only made it available today, a few hours before we're having this debate. I note that a lot of the criticism of what was in the report, certainly that I saw on social media, was within 40 minutes of making the report available, and clearly people were disappointed that some things weren't in the report or couldn't find them there. But I hope that when people read the report in full, not just the 45 pages of executive summary, which is a very large executive summary, but the whole report, if you get a chance to do it. I haven't read all of it, but I've read a lot of it. There is a lot of substance in this report. There's also a lot of very direct language that I can understand has made people bristle in this House in terms of the criticism of some public representatives and the approach and suggested motivation of the statements that they've made. But can I appeal to people not to make this issue about us as public representatives, as a House, as local authority members? I understand that criticism, but the focus here has got to be on the issue, on the families, on the veterans, so that we try to learn lessons from very serious mistakes that should not have happened, and we learn from them and ensure that we change systems in our defence forces and in our governance structures to make sure that many of the recommendations in this report, some of which are outside of the terms of reference, I would say, are taken on board seriously in terms of consideration, so that we can learn lessons from a report that is an outlining of history, as well as a very blunt critique of some of the commentary around Jadotville, a report that questions the accuracy of what some have said at different times, and I can understand, and it doesn't surprise me at all, that people have pushed back on some of that language. I think it's self-evident that this report hasn't been written for political popularity. This is a report that I think was genuinely written on the basis of trying to establish facts in a very blunt language, or through a very blunt use of language. And some of the recommendations are strong, and some of the criticism not just of politicians, but of the Defence Forces, and the way in which people were treated are also equally strong and described in very stark and blunt terms. Terms like vilification, whispering campaigns, the destruction of the relationship between men and the Defence Forces and their state. This is powerful language. It's hard-hitting. And I think we can learn a lot from it. There are some who will question and disagree with the recommendations, and that is their right to do that. But I think rather than, and I deliberately haven't responded to each recommendation in terms of how I intend to respond to it, because I think a report that's nearly 500 pages long needs some time to consider and digest, so that we can take what's strong and positive and powerful from this report. We can question areas of this report that need to be challenged and questioned, should that happen. And we, most importantly, can learn lessons and adopt recommendations. You know, I think there's a number of things that do need to be said, though. The awarding of medals has got to be within a military system, and I think everybody agrees with that. But the treatment of men or women in our defence forces is not just about the military system. It is my job as Minister for Defence on behalf of the state to ensure that we train, that we support and we respect members of our defence forces, both past and present, in terms of the challenges that we ask of them. So I will respond to this report in as ambitious a way as I can as a minister in the domain that I operate in terms of learning lessons from the recommendations here, in particular in terms of how we treat our veterans, which I think has improved dramatically in recent decades. But that's not to say it can't continue to improve. And some of the recommendations in this report around, for example, the setting up of a commissioner for veterans is something that I am already discussing with our team in the Department of Defence and with a new incoming Chief of Staff in a few months' time. So let's focus on some of the positives on this report as well. This report asks some hard questions of us in some pretty tough language. And of course, it is our job to be constructively critical of a report of this scale and substance and breadth. But I think we have to, focus on the substance of the issues, perhaps more than some of the criticisms of ourselves, and also focus on accuracy, because that is important in terms of the credibility of how we deal with this issue, because it's a hugely emotive issue, but we have got to match the emotion and the responsibility that comes with that with historical accuracy too. So I will happily interact with this House, and I think it would be very useful if we took the time over the next few weeks, because we'll get some time, I hope, over the next few weeks, to really study this report. And I'm happy to speak to anybody individually in relation to it in terms of concerns that they may have. But we can perhaps come back as a collective to discuss it at that point. And at that point, I, as a minister, will be able to, I think, provide a lot more detail in terms of how we can respond to some of the good recommendations in this report, and also what we can do separate to this report in terms of having a state commemoration for those who served in Jadotville, which is one of the recommendations of this report too. So I don't think it's fair to say that there's nothing in this report that recognises the significant contribution of our defence forces in the Battle of Jadotville. The other thing I'd say is that this report makes a very strong effort to try to create the context around Jadotville, which was not an isolated battle. It was part of a much broader and extremely complex peacekeeping mission that resulted in a lot of tragedy In fact, men trying to reach our Defence Force personnel in Jadotville died while trying to cross a bridge, unable to reach Commandant Quinlan and those serving under him. And there are many, I think, stories like that need to be recognised in the context of this broader story as well. So lots of lessons to be learned. A hard-hitting report, undoubtedly, one that does, I think, raise the hackles of the political system. And I would just ask people to take some time to read what is a detailed report, and let's then come back and have an equally blunt conversation in terms of how we respond to it as policymakers, and in my case, as a member of government and Minister for Defence. And can I just finally say to all of those who served in Jadotville, to their families who are now representing their interests, it is because we value your contribution. It is because we are genuinely sorry about what happened to you when you came home. And we want to learn lessons from that to ensure that it doesn't happen to another generation of Irish soldiers at any point in the future. It is because we continue to take your stories seriously that I asked for this report to be produced. And we have produced specific medals for Jadotville in the Bon Jadotville medal, as well as citations and scrolls that families and individuals have got. I know that's not the same as a Distinguished Service Medal, and I know what that means to soldiers. But what I would also say is that we are now, as we speak, setting up the structures required to put a medals board in place to look at the potential awarding of a DSM to Commandant Quinlan, who, if he receives that, will not only be receiving it on behalf of himself and the leadership that he has shown, but he will be receiving it on behalf of the contribution of all that were serving around him. And that is also made clear in this report. I know that's not enough, Senator, for many people. I accept that. But I'm just saying there are positives in this report. There are also things that I think we need to reflect on over the summer, and I will certainly look forward to coming back to this House at the appropriate time when we can continue this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. And we will continue the debate in September on the 60th anniversary. The House stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow in the Dáil Chamber.